Four, please, on the pod from Washington, D.C., Gabe Cohen. We have a CNN correspondent. We got the big dogs coming in to help us cover the Scottie Scheffler case. Gabe Cohen was on the ground in Louisville on Thursday. He's been covering the Scottie Scheffler story from the national news perspective. He also happens to be a college friend of mine, so I had to reach out, figure out what exactly is going on the inside. So on this pod, he'll give his perspective of what he saw on the ground in Louisville, what his sources have been telling him about this case. He had a particular story on Wednesday where he and his CNN colleagues were among those to report that certain officials within the police department in Louisville were starting to develop some thoughts that maybe the felony charge against Scottie Scheffler was excessive. So he talks a little bit about his reporting, and he talks about how this compares to what he has seen reporting on high-profile cases, some of which involve celebrities, and some of which might not, but might be treated similarly or differently to what's going on with Scottie Scheffler. So Gabe Cohen of CNN coming up right now on Eyes on Golf. We have a correspondent from CNN. We're not necessarily, this is not going to be a political podcast, but we're going with the mainstream media into Eyes on Golf. And my fraternity brother at Northwestern, Gabe Cohen, is here. Gabe, fresh off the plane from Louisville on Friday. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm a little tired. Just got in about 30 minutes ago back home after a busy trip to Louisville with everything that's playing out right now. But I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, a busy trip that they didn't let you ask questions at, which we're going to have to get to. But we were talking about a couple months ago, you reached out to me. You saw me on PGA Tour Live. That was totally before any of this happened. So I know that you've been following everything that's going on in the golf space. And now all of a sudden you parachute in to tell the story from a national news perspective. As you've seen everything move around with this Scottie Scheffler story, what have you noticed?
Look, there are a lot of aspects of this story that I think are really interesting. You gave a little bit of the background there. I cover news exclusively. I don't cover sports. I don't cover golf, but I'm a major golf fan, weekly consumer, watching every tournament. And so when this happened, of course, I was getting alerts, not just from the sportscasters I follow, but news outlets. This got picked up quickly, and I dove in because I have sources on the ground in Louisville. So I started just reporting this out as I have been doing over the past few days. And yeah, it's been an interesting case to follow. Definitely one that has captured the spotlight nationwide. But in Louisville, where I spent the last couple of days, it has been a headache, to say the least, for the mayor and the police chief as they are trying, and the prosecutor's office, as they're trying to work through this case as more details are coming out.
Yeah, for everyone to get up to speed, there was a press conference that was held on Thursday, May 23rd. That came after the original arraignment for Scottie Scheffler was scheduled for May 21st. His lawyer, Steve Romines, goes to court, makes sure with the prosecution on the other side, trying to expedite this arraignment to May 21st. He gets it postponed due to a scheduling issue. So that will happen on June 3rd. But then this press conference is held. And what was the pulse on the ground in Louisville as the mayor spoke, as the police chief spoke, and no questions were permitted to the media and to the audience?
Yeah, so that was a last-minute decision, at least something that none of us in the media knew was coming. This was previewed as a press conference. It was not a press conference. It was a press briefing. We were not allowed to ask any questions. We did not know that until the mayor and the police chief actually stepped up onto the stage and said they're not going to be taking any questions today. It was also interesting, just to give you a sense, it was a packed room. There were 20-some cameras in the space in City Hall, a ton of officials from the police department. I found that pretty striking. I go to press conferences often. It's certainly not unheard of for there to be a lot of officials in the room, but I found it striking that there were at least a dozen officials from the police department, if not more than that, in the room. And having spoken just a little bit to the police department over the past few days, because they are really staying tight-lipped, they're not saying much about this case. They had told us heading into this event, this press briefing yesterday, that we were going to get the complete findings from the police chief.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some reporting a couple days ago that referenced what officials in the Louisville Police Department were feeling. And when I had reached out to the police department for comment, they sent me a response that essentially said, you know what, just tune into the press conference and there will be no doubt. That's how they put it. No doubt about what our stance is on these charges. And yet here we are some 24 hours later, and there are still a lot of doubts. And it's hard to know what their stance is, because really officials haven't wanted to comment on these charges. They have not been critical publicly of Scheffler. They haven't said he's innocent of these charges, but their words have been very delicate. The mayor just yesterday, he called it an unfortunate set of circumstances. He referenced that it was dark and rainy, intense conditions. Lines up much more closely with what Scheffler has said, that it was this chaotic misunderstanding than what's in the police report, which is that he disobeyed an officer, that he dragged the officer with his car. And I'm not saying that did not happen. But as of now, it's been very interesting to listen to how officials are talking about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces here. There's a lot of pieces in terms of perhaps agendas. You see a governmental office here, you see police, and they're both talking about letting the judicial process play out. There's obviously an aspect with Louisville that they don't need this. The fact that you texted me that you were getting on the plane the other day, I thought to myself, okay, this is serious. The fact that national news is coming for this press briefing. So do you get the sense that there's a different agenda being held by perhaps the mayor and the police chief, who are in their now second year, I believe, in terms of being at their current positions? And then obviously the actual prosecution, and there's a whole law enforcement side to this, trying to protect the officers at question?
I really can't comment on that. It's really hard to know what a police department's thinking or what a mayor is thinking. In this case, certainly there are always politics at play. But look, we have to remember that we're still in the early days of an investigation that's playing out. And so I also think the police department, the prosecutor's office, the mayor's office, they're trying not to step in it as much as they can. And so that could be a big part of why they're trying to avoid any sort of sweeping statements about what happened or where the case is going. Just look at the prosecutor's office. I've spoken with them several times about the concerns I'm hearing about the charges, particularly that felony charge. And again, they have reiterated, we have made no final decisions on how the case is going to be prosecuted, that we're still gathering information. So I think they're trying to leave themselves that space, as I would expect them to, having covered a lot of these cases, to be able to amend or even drop the charges maybe before that arraignment on June 3rd. We don't know if that's going to happen. It does feel like the story has been moving more quickly over the past few days, especially with this video coming out. There's a lot of commentary online, but I think that these officials in Louisville are trying to say, okay, let's pump the brakes. Let us do our investigation before you jump to any conclusions about what evidence we have or we don't have.
You reported on Wednesday, this was before the press briefing, that high-ranking police officials in Louisville have privately voiced concerns that the felony charge against Scottie Scheffler is excessive. Still seems like all 4 charges are on the table, including the felony charge. How do you see that changing in the next couple weeks?
The short answer is I don't know. It's really difficult to read the tea leaves, and not my job, and seems a little dangerous to do that. I would not be surprised if things changed based on the conversations that I'm having with various parties. Like I said, or like you mentioned, I reported just a couple days ago that a source has told me that behind closed doors, at least some of the top brass within the Louisville Police Department have started voicing some concerns that at least the felony charge, which is by far the most serious of the charges he's facing, might be excessive here. I spoke to this source who told me during a meeting that included multiple of those high-ranking officials, there was really consensus in the room that the charge felt a little bit excessive, a little bit extreme. We don't know if those conversations were shared. Those opinions were shared with the prosecutor's office at this point. Remember, they're the ones prosecuting the case now, not the police department. The police department just made the initial arrest. But that opinion's out there. So it's possible that more officials in the police department are feeling that. I've also spoken to some officials in Louisville, including one who went on the record with me in that reporting a couple days ago, Anthony Piagentini. He's a council member. He represents the district where that arrest happened. And he's been following this story closely. He has been in meetings with various officials in the city. And he told me he, without a doubt, feels like this case is being overcharged, that the charges should probably all be dropped against Scheffler, but at the very least, they should be reduced to, as he described it, a tiny, tiny misdemeanor. Now, that said, we don't know in totality what the evidence looks like here. You mentioned the videos that have been released just yesterday by the Louisville Police Department. None of the video shows the initial incident that is really the focus of the case, when Scheffler allegedly got stopped by that officer, when he disregarded what the officer told him to do, he disobeyed, allegedly, and then allegedly dragged the officer, knocked him down with his car. What the video shows are the seconds after that. As Scheffler is starting to pull into a driveway of some sort, you can see the officer sprinting after the car. He gets to Scheffler's vehicle. He appears to strike the car with an object. It's not clear what that was. And then he's conversing with Scheffler through the window. Other officers get there and they arrest Scheffler. But we do not have any video. And the city says they're not aware of any video of that initial incident because the officer wasn't wearing a body camera, or excuse me, he didn't have the body camera turned on at the time. And that's a violation of the department's policy. That was really the focus of what the police chief talked about yesterday, saying the officer violated their policy. He has gotten some counseling from a supervisor. That may be the end of it in terms of that violation. But it raises a lot of questions about, okay, what is the evidence here? And with all of these opinions flying around about the charges, about what Scottie Scheffler should face, it's unclear if the city is going to want to move in one direction or the other, or come out more forcefully one way or the other. But I really can't predict it.
Fans need to understand out there, just because what you maybe saw in the video was happening in the aftermath of Scheffler dragging Detective Gillis, because that's what we're hearing, right, Gabe? That if there was an incident that created these injuries for Brian Gillis, that sent him to the hospital, that ripped his pants, that would have happened before any of the video that we saw was captured.
Correct. Yes, that would have happened before the incident that's captured in the video. None of it is on video, that initial incident. And I've seen a lot of commentary online saying this doesn't look like assault, referencing the video that was released yesterday, but that is not what they are saying was assault, that it is coming afterward. You're right.
In terms of the prosecutor, I want to touch on him for a second, because a lot of golf fans, there were reports as early as Monday that the charges were going to be dropped against Scheffler. And then on Tuesday, we get video on Monday before what would have been the arraignment, with Steve Romine, Scottie Scheffler's lawyer, asking for the postponement. And the prosecution is not exactly voicing an opinion of, let's just get done with this, let's throw out the charges, let's move on. Was the pulse of the prosecution perhaps not what one would have expected with such a high-profile individual and everything going on this week?
I think that's hard to say. It depends on the prosecutor. It depends on the case. It depends on the city and the state you're in. So I can't really comment on this prosecutor's sort of behavior, rhetoric. So I can't say I'm particularly surprised. Look, speaking to Scottie Scheffler's attorney, he is the first to say a defense attorney and a prosecutor, they have an inherently adversarial relationship. And that he's never surprised, because I asked Scheffler's attorney, I asked Steve Romine, are you surprised by some of this behavior? Are you surprised the case is moving forward in the way it is? And he's told me, no, that this happens all the time. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. It just does, because this is such a high profile case. And so people are sort of shocked by how slow at times it is, how much it is about that actual process in court, which can get a little dry and convoluted at times. And so, but look, you brought up the reports over the weekend that the charges were likely going to be dropped early in the week. My first call after that happened, those reports came out, was to Steve Romine's to figure out what the case was with that. And He immediately said, I have no idea where those reports are coming from. And within a few hours, he was saying on the record, he has no reason to believe that's true. The prosecutor's office has been very tight-lipped about this. They're not saying much. So I also asked them, but we really didn't get much of a response, except we haven't made any final decision. So I'm not sure where those reports were coming from. I don't think there was indication based on the parties I'm talking to that there was some sudden shift from when those reports were coming out to the decisions that were being made by the prosecutor's office or the defense in the days after.
Now, Steve Romines, I understand he's a high-powered attorney in Louisville, probably cost Scottie Scheffler a lot of money. It doesn't seem like a hard job he's doing so far. Right now it's just, hey, we're not dropping the charges. We're going to continue to litigate this out, or the charges are going to be dropped. So many times in high-profile cases with high-profile individuals, right? A celebrity gets arrested. They want to perhaps reach a settlement or get rid of things as quickly as possible. That is the exact opposite of the tone we're hearing from the Scheffler camp, that he's willing to go to trial and get everything cleared. So in this next week and a half, what sort of conversations could even be had in terms of if there is perhaps a compromise between Steve Romines and the actual prosecutor's office?
That's a good question, and not something we necessarily know the answer to at this point. I would have to imagine, having covered plenty of court cases before, that there are conversations always happening between the prosecutor's office and the defense attorney. What those conversations have looked like so far, I can't say. Steve Romines hasn't commented on that. The prosecutor's office hasn't commented on that. Is there possibly some negotiation happening behind the scenes to find a plea deal that works for both sides? Maybe. We really don't know that at this point. We can't confirm that at this point. But you're right that publicly, Steve Romines, Scottie Scheffler's attorney, has definitely felt like they have the leverage right now. They believe that these videos only line up with their version of events. As I mentioned, public officials really have been using this sort of caged language, very delicate language. So it's not like the pressure seems to be on Scheffler's camp in any way. And so, yeah, his attorney has said at this point, we're not going to take a plea deal, drop the charges, or let's go to court. And I think that's trying to put the pressure on the prosecutor's office. But it's not really clear if the prosecutor's office at this point is feeling that pressure. They haven't spoken publicly about this. They're saying, give us time. We're going to see where we land on this. So we don't know what those conversations look like, or if they're trying to get Scottie Scheffler to plead out to something. We just don't know at this point.
Yeah, there's obviously, there was talk, like you said, when those rumors were coming out, it could just be a traffic misdemeanor, even though every PGA Tour player seems to tell you they were all doing the same sort of thing that day. So that would still feel perhaps like a concession on Scheffler's side. But obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces there. How about from the aspect of Scottie Scheffler being a celebrity figure, this being a big deal for Louisville, in terms of other cases that you've seen? Does a situation like this feel expedited because of the high-profile nature of the case?
I don't think so. This doesn't stand out to me as a case that's been handled wildly different from any other case that ends up high profile for whatever reason, because it involves a celebrity or because of how it played out, how the events played out. So I wouldn't say that there are a lot of aspects that are really wildly unique. But like I said, I have found it interesting how officials who are either within the police department or adjacent to the police department, for example, a mayor, how they talk about it. Because what you'll often see with cases where charges have been filed against somebody, where officials come out more strongly, where you'll hear a police chief say, this person did this thing and we're prosecuting it, and XYZ. I have been interested to see that the officials really haven't wanted to take a side, especially the mayor, who has really not taken a side on this. The strongest stance we've seen was yesterday over the body camera violation, really. We haven't seen that public criticism of Scottie Scheffler that you might expect from officials, given that he was arrested for assaulting a police officer, arrested for a felony. But I can't say I've never seen it before. It's not, and I think it's dangerous to read anything in the tea leaves from from how it's been handled over the past few days. We don't know what's happening behind the scene. There's a lot of evidence we're not aware of at this point. We know there is some other video, though not of that initial incident. So we don't know what's out there that might help push the story forward.
I'll read some tea leaves that you don't have to as the reporter here. In terms of the mayor, Craig Greenberg, did mention recent events happening within Louisville when he was referencing the body camera not being worn. And it felt like he didn't use Breonna Taylor's name, but there seemed to be an indirect connection to some of the events that have happened with Louisville law enforcement as of late. So when you get on the plane going to Louisville, as opposed to so many of the other cities that you cover events in, may cover cases in, how is that pulse different within the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky right now as compared to other states?
Well, I think with any story, look, first and foremost, I'm focused on the details of Scottie Scheffler's case as a standalone, unique case, not looking back to previous ones. But you have to have that in the back of your head in trying to provide that context for why the police department may be a little careful in their language, or why the mayor may be a little slow to jump on board the charges, the arrest that was made by a Louisville police officer. I'm not sure you can completely read into that of the behavior of officials in Louisville and how it connects back to previous excessive force issues or civil rights violation issues within Louisville. Look, it's a different case when it's the number one golfer in the world, Scottie Scheffler, being arrested. It's a very odd situation. But it was in the back of my head for sure, looking at how officials would sort of react and how they would talk about it.
Yeah, it's crazy that we're talking about this within the context of Scottie Scheffler, world number one. Obviously, there are, would be tons of character witnesses to voice their opinion of Scottie. We're talking on Friday just now. Nick Bosa this morning said of Brock Purdy, he's basically has the demeanor of Scottie Scheffler, but didn't get arrested, was essentially, I'm paraphrasing, what Nick Bosa was saying. So there's obviously a lot of these aspects of Scottie Scheffler, these public aspects that have adjusted, to all the way that all of this is looked at, the way that Scottie Scheffler's career is looked at. I'm not even you're not a lawyer, so I was thinking about this, but I'm not going to ask you if Scottie Scheffler's career is affected by this, the damages that he could ask for after. That's a whole other story. But I do want to ask, we're now talking about 10 days out from the scheduled arraignment. So in those 10 days, you on the journalistic side, what will you be looking out for leading up to that arraignment?
Well, I'm certainly going to be talking to the two sides to see if they are willing to speak about any sort of progress happening. And I'll be pushing my sources to get a sense of the mood within City Hall, within the police department, within the mayor's office, among the council, as to how much longer they want this to move forward if they don't feel that the case, and particularly that felony charge, if they don't feel that the evidence is there. So I think that's a big question here, is to have these charges just sort of hanging over the head of not just Scottie Scheffler, but of the city of Louisville and all this media attention. I think there probably comes a point where other local officials, people in power, are going to start saying, okay, what is the evidence? How much of a case is there here? But that said, from talking to sources, it's not clear how much the prosecutor's office is directly sharing that with various parties. We don't know. We really don't know how much that's happening. So I'll just keep digging on what the mood is and what evidence is being dug up that might push this forward. But from where we're at now, I think it is quite telling that, as I reported before, that there are top officials within the police department who are really concerned about this felony charge. If that proves out in the coming weeks and that feeling starts growing, that could put pressure on the prosecutor's office, but that's really not clear at this point. We'll have to see what evidence they have.
So in other words, it's a lot of speculation, but when the mayor and the police chief go on air and they say, we're going to let the judicial process play out, of course, there might be some conversations behind closed doors in terms of the way that this is affecting Louisville, the way this might affect professional events coming to Louisville in the future, and the way, like we said, this might affect the future of Scottie Scheffler's career. Was this your first time in Louisville, Gabe?
My first time in Louisville, yep.
I was thinking a different fraternity, not ours, used to do a trip to Louisville, but we never we never made the Kentucky Derby trip.
Yeah, I wish I made that trip. I got to tell you.
Just last thing. I mean, before I let you go, you've been. I texted you. It felt like you're on the Scottie Scheffler beat. How has covering an athlete, how has covering an incident like this in the sports world differed than what you do from a day-to-day basis at CNN?
It's funny. It really doesn't feel that different. It feels different for me personally, being a massive fan of the sport, and as a result, a major viewer and consumer of content around golf. And so my feeds at this point are just inundated with Scheffler and golf content, given what this has caused on social media. But in terms of the case, covering it, it doesn't feel that different than covering any other case. It just has a very unique twist on it.
Interesting. All right. Well, we got to get out and play some golf this year. Maybe you can find me a place in DC that I haven't yet been before.
Let's do it anytime you want.
Well, you're busy right now going back and forth to Louisville. I don't know if you can get us into Valhalla at the moment. Gabe Cohen, correspondent for CNN. Thanks for breaking down everything with Scottie Scheffler.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thanks to Gabe for coming on. Thanks to all of you for listening as we continue to try to figure out this Scottie Scheffler story. Perhaps we'll have some more podcasts related to this in the future. That arraignment is coming up on June 3rd, 10 days away. We're taping this on Friday of Charles Schwab Challenge Week. I saw Scottie Scheffler, as we're taping, just made 3 straight birdies, 4 under round today to get back to 2 under. So maybe before that arraignment, Scottie Scheffler will have another PGA Tour title. Remember to follow and subscribe to Eyes on Golf and myself, Jeff Eisenband. I will see you next week.